So we are moving now directly into the government session, and Vasant Hanavar, who is also a member of the executive committee, will be moderating this session. Vasant is from Penn State, and we have two speakers.
Who's going first? It's Phil. Fen. Okay. So we have two speakers, Fenzal from NSF and Phil Byrne from NIH. And so let's start with Fenzal. She has been introduced already, so I'll keep this brief. Fen is the program director who is leading this hubs and spokes solicitation. And so she's going to talk about essentially funding opportunities in this space.
So for everybody who heard me speak in the morning, now this is where I get to talk about funding opportunities at NSF. This is the program officer talk right now. Let me grab this. And what I'm going to talk about is actually, since we've already talked about the hubs, we've already talked about the spokes, all of the other interesting funding opportunities at NSF and what the NSF portfolio looks like in big data. So we actually have a framework at NSF right now to think about how we fund big data activities. And it's effectively in 4 parts. The foundational research that we fund is one quadrant. We also think about cyber infrastructure and infrastructure supporting data. We think about education, and we also think about collaboration, community building, which is what the hubs and spokes really fit under, even though they do support aspects of all four pieces. And so a little bit about some of our current programs in foundational research and data science. The Big Data program, which is just, the acronym is all capitals, Big Data, is a cross-foundational program. Vasant was the first program manager of this program. He initiated it. And it focuses on sort of 2 aspects, and I'll go into detail a little bit more about foundational approaches and innovative applications in big data. So both the technology and innovative application areas in certain domains for data science and big data. With that, we have some other programs that are noteworthy. I'll go in the order. CDS&E is another long-standing program that has been at NSF. It is another cross-directorate program, and it's called Computational Data Science and Engineering. It's led by NPS, so it has a slightly different flavor than big data if you take a look at it. It has aspects of the computational sciences in it as well. 2 other programs of note are Quantitative Approaches in Biomedical Big Data. It's a combined program between NIH and the DMS division within our Math and Physical Science Directorate, as well as BDD, Big Data and Disaster Research, which is within computer science. These are 2 current sort of newer programs that I want you to be aware of this year in sort of the core research areas of data science. NSF is also funding an activity called Future Cloud. It's not directly data science in some traditional sense. It really is us thinking about what is the future of cloud computing? What is the research that needs to be done and thinking about the next generation of cloud technologies? So a little bit more about the Big Data program, which every year comes out to be approximately like $25 million in funding that becomes available for researchers. There's 2 categories. One of them is called foundational proposals. So foundational techniques, theories, methodologies that can be applied across a large set of application areas. Paired that with innovative applications where it's supposed to be funding research that, yes, looks at novel techniques, but actually is really focused on first applying them to one specific application area. And so it is supposed to be the development of new techniques. It's not just application of previously researched big data technology into an application area, but it has the flavor of really want to focus on an application area first to see if that technique is feasible, if it's useful. The Big Data Research Program has actually had a very, very diverse history. of who's been participants in it. The very first year, we had NIH as a participant in the program, and they funded a whole bunch of medical and bio-related programs and research projects. This past year, we had the Office of Financial Research and the Treasury Department also collaborating, funding topics in financial research and big data. The initial, that first year, NSF and NIH awarded about 45 projects. And that first year, we still had two different categories of sizes for awards made. That's since then, it's collapsed to a single size. And you can see that, there's a large representation of the data collection, management, mining, machine learning, and so about half of it gets dedicated to what I sort of think of as traditional data science or data mining and data management. More recently, in 2004, we changed the way that we sort of piled things together and cut and sliced our look at what awards were made. This new sort of set of ways of grouping projects are into DKA, which is the data knowledge analytics, DKM, which is data knowledge management, CSD, which is about computational scientific discovery, and IA, innovative applications. And so you can see the breakdown is that data and knowledge analytics is a sort of a dominant one from that year. But there, that there is also a high representation of data and knowledge management. 2005, we've just got the 30 funded proposals, and we have funded 30 of them. About 63% are in that foundational category, and 20% are in the innovative applications, and the other 17% are combined. So they're both on both areas. Turns out it's about 42 proposals because some of the proposals are multi-institutional, and we funded about 6 eager grants. We are now in preparation, yet again, for a 2016 solicitation where we'll have hopefully some more partners from federal agencies. And you should expect to see fairly similar structures from the previous years. The last 2 years of structure for the big data solicitation were fairly consistent with each other. So do take a look as we're developing 2016 at the previous year's solicitation if you haven't seen it yet, if you want to apply. A few things of note. There is a brand new presidential initiative called the National Strategic Computing Initiative, really focused on what was traditionally called high-performance computing. There's a lot of aspects to this high-performance computing initiative, which has both a focus on building the next big computer, not physically a single computer, but the new stack for our next generation supercomputer. But there is also a focus on what about data? What does data mean in the HPC world now? What is the overlap between the National Strategic Computing Initiative and our data science efforts? And what are the new computational machinery that we need and infrastructure that we need to think about data science in that kind of realm? So speaking of infrastructure, moving on to that second part of the slice is our programs that support cyber infrastructure. And so cyber infrastructure, there are 2 big programs that is supported by the Computer Science Directorate in the Advanced Computing Infrastructure Division. One of them is CDD&I, which supports development of campus cyber infrastructure and networking. The other one is called DIBS. This is called Data Infrastructure Building Blocks. And what DIBS is, it funds activities and pilots in developing data infrastructure for certain domains. And it starts out with a small-scale award, and if that pilot is successful, a larger-scale award to actually implement the infrastructure itself. So it's a 2-phase program, and the idea is how do we really start building some of the data infrastructure needed in certain domains. 2 examples that came out or one example is EarthCube, which we co-fund with the Geo Directorate, and that creates a large-scale infrastructure for earth sciences that NSF has been funding for the last few years. We've also funded activities in social science through DIBS and in several other domains as well. Writer is a program that we work with in our Social, Behavioral, and Economics Directorate, which is about creating infrastructure in social science and economic sciences. That's a separate program from DIBS. That's a call-out that SBE manages. And similarly, BCC is a program about building community and capacity in data-intensive research and education, which has a focus on not just when we think infrastructure, technological infrastructure, but what about human infrastructure? What about the networks of people that need to actually go out there and do data science? The third quadrant is our education and workforce around data science quadrant. And one of the big programs that we've had in the past that filled this quadrant was the NSF Research Traineeship. And that one, that is a continuing program at NSF, but for the last 2 years, they've had data-enabled science and engineering as a priority goal. So while they would fund research traineeship programs in other fields as well, they've sort of called out the community to say, we really want particularly research traineeships, this is for graduate students, in the data science field. So that this is a very large program. It's about $30 million a year. So over the last 2 years, I think about 60% has been funded in the DESI area. So it's about a $30 million investment by NSF in this area of data science education. We're sort of moving forward and trying to think about what else we can do in education, and we've hosted this workshop to look at how we can support grad students across many disciplines to identify themselves as data scientists and to work with other people who identify as data scientists. It's a fairly successful workshop in University of Washington, and I think you'll see in the future a really strong focus on graduate education and with data science. I'm sort of running out of time, so I only have a couple of other slides I really need to mention. One, we have a few more education workshops that are upcoming. One of them is the NAS, National Academy of Science Workshop on Envisioning the Data Science Discipline. It's funded by multiple directorates within NSF and NIH. And we also have a new advisory committee that is focused on education and research for data science. So Big Data Hubs is part of this last quadrant, but there are a few more activities such as RDA, which somebody's already mentioned, a few different opportunities, which is bringing people together to think about collaborations in data, standards in data, things like that. There's also the International Data Week in 2016, which is supported by Birdie. And I'm going to skip past some of the fascinating aspect in the policy part of that, to just mention some upcoming activities that you may be interested in that NSF is funding and hosting. We have a workshop in data sharing for health-related data that is March of 2016, and this is exciting. If you want to go to Rome next year, we are hosting a workshop on real-time analytics in multi-latency, multi-party, metro-scale networks. Yes, it's when I say aspirational, this is the exciting aspirational part of it. It's co-chaired by Chiton Borough at NSF and also by DHS, our Department of Homeland Security. So welcome you to join this IoT workshop in Rome in April. So with that, I'm just going to finish up my written portion of the talk. I told you I was going to do my program officer spiel. So I have to do it sometime. So great.
So should we take the questions later? Okay, sir.
All right, great. Wait, any questions on my slides? Have I stunned everybody? Oh, go ahead.
I do have one question just about, it's very specific, but what about undergraduate education? How are you preparing even earlier besides you mentioned a graduate program?
So I'm going to say that I'm not an expert in undergraduate education, but we certainly fund, we fund RU supplements for all of our awards to do undergraduate research. So any of those awards that we've seen funded in data science can come to NSF and ask for undergraduate supplements, extra funding. On top of that, I know several of the institutions that we fund are really looking at undergraduate education in terms of what is the curriculum development to address data science. And we've had a workshop fairly recently about undergraduate education data science that we co-funded, I believe, with, I want to say NIH, but I may be wrong.
Could I ask you to say a word or two about actually any of the data linkage things that might have actually come out of, I know like BCC has attempted to do some things where getting state data sets linked together and researchers, I don't know, do you have any successes or anything else that's maybe talked, or I guess actually other than BCC where maybe those types of activities have grown? So
when you say data linkages, what exactly do you mean?
I know that actually, I'm not supposed to say I was on a panel, but I sat on a panel and different states were actually working together across commissioners' districts within their states to actually look at actually connecting data sets together.
Right. So sharing data, I think, it's hard to say because that comes in at so many different programs, right? There's no program that says we're going to specifically fund exactly that, except for actually, in some sense, hubs, or spokes, which actually says we're going to go fund data sharing activities directly. There are a few activities within the ACI that looks at sort of the research behind doing that, and then also implementing some of the infrastructure like DIBS looks at that in the sense of some of those projects look at long-tail data and the idea of how do we compile long-tail data into a single repository and things like that. So it's hard to say because it actually appears multiple places in a lot of different programs.
Thanks.
So what are the success rates typically for the big data calls?
So the success rates are, I can say this, I don't know what we've decided as policy to share, but the success rates for the last few years has been much higher than the first year of the big data call. They are double digits. Yeah, no, I don't think it actually, I don't know that the success rate is right now. Is it? Okay. Because usually the number of proposals that comes in is not public, the number of awards. For the program, okay, so
In the first year,
it was very
5 to 6%.
percent, yeah.
And I don't know what it was in the subsequent years.
Yeah, I think it was more like 10, I want to say. So it's much higher in later years. I think people also, you have to realize that the later years of a program means that people understand what it's actually asking for. So there are a lot of things that come in that aren't exactly responsive to what we want in the first year. And I think the community understands what it's about later years.
So we probably should move on to the next speaker. Fen will be around if you want to catch her, right?
I will be around.
Yeah, thanks. So Phil Bourne is coming remotely, so I hope it's set up. It's being set up. Okay, he's here. Okay. Right. So quickly introducing Phil Bourne. Phil Bourne is the AD for Data Science at the National Institutes of Health. For those of you who may not know his background, I mean, he has done a lot of work in protein structure. He was the head of the Protein Data Bank before. He has been the founding editor of the PLOS Computational Biology Journal, a very strong advocate for open data and open science. And he's now at NIH, leading the NIH Big Data to Knowledge Initiative. So he's going to tell us about the NIH programs in this space.
Okay, thanks very much. Can you hear me? Hopefully you can hear me. Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you very much. I have no idea if there's one person or 1,000 people out there, but anyway, it doesn't matter. So I'm just going to tell you very briefly about some of the big data initiatives at NIH. I'm actually going to take a different tack. I'm really going to describe more about the motivation than the specific programs. But if you have any questions about specific programs, I'll be happy to try and answer them. But, and of course, if you're giving talks about open data, you really need to make the slides open as well. So essentially everything I do is on SlideShare, so you can always get at that. Now I just have to be able to figure it out. So I think a question we've been asking ourselves here, and it's not something we put necessarily in something we send to Congress, but it is the notion of whether what's going on around the growth of data and analytics will be disruptive to biomedical research and healthcare. And I thought I'd just probe that a bit and based on my own sort of interpretation. And I'm just using another example because I use this to sort of impress upon our leadership here. I report directly to the director of NIH, Francis Collins, and essentially how we sort of think about it. And I'll do it in the context of something you're probably fairly familiar with, but maybe not the way it's described. But the whole notion of digitization and what happens when you digitize is this idea that as that digitized content grows exponentially, in the first phase, you're in this sort of 6D phases of change. And the first phase, because you're low on the exponential curve, it's kind of a deceptive phase. And I would argue, without going into the details in 10 minutes, that that was in part the downfall of Kodak. They didn't realize this deceptive phase. But then, of course, you reach this point of disruption where the content grows very significantly, very fast. And ultimately, you then go through these other stages, which I, as a left-winger, really like, which, of course, is demonetization, dematerialization, and ultimately democratization. And I think what's happened in this particular industry is really intriguing because the value proposition now has absolutely nothing to do, even really, certainly with photographs, but it's really about having created digital media as a bona fide form of instant communication with, in the case of, say, for example, Instagram, using 300 million users and an evaluation of $60 billion, a completely different industry. So then you have to ask yourself, well, what does that mean to healthcare? Could this same kind of thing happen? I would say we are low down on this exponential growth curve of digital content. Yes, in terms of genomics and other areas, we've had digital content for quite a long time, but the impact of the electronic health record and the digitization of that over the last few years, and really just what's clearly a hugely fast-growing rate of data, makes you ask the question: will we enter this? Will we enter this disruptive phase? And will we see something come out of this that's in fact quite different? So will we get to this point of democratization? We're already being perturbed by the announcement and development of things like precision medicine, where ultimately you get to the point of a patient-centered healthcare system, where the patient is actually the person driving the process through ownership and access to their own healthcare information. So this is, what could happen. Will it happen? I don't really know, but I suspect not in quite such a dramatic form as we saw in other industries, in part because it's not really a free enterprise operation. 60% of all biomedical research is funded by the government, and healthcare itself and the healthcare providers, it's that one can argue is not a free market either. But there might be perturbations. So if there are such a set of perturbations because of the digitization and hence the big data that arrives, what's that future going to look like? And again, what we fund and what we're thinking about is based on the sort of premises of what I'm going to show you. First of all, the open collaborative science becomes increasingly important nationally and internationally. And for example, we're just at the moment running an open science prize with the Wellcome Trust in the UK and with the Howard Hughes Medical Institute. So this is a collaboration between agencies, and we just heard about other examples from NSF, and I think that this to me is really encouraging that these kinds of things are going on, because let's face it, data is international. It's not governed by international boundaries and certainly funding mechanisms, even though that's unfortunately the way it sort of plays out. I think another implication that we're grappling with is the idea that the data and associated analytics becomes of increasing value to scholarship. And that is, to me at least, and other people here, amazingly important, because that changes the social fabric of what we do. It moves the emphasis in principle, it's a cultural shift that doesn't come easily, away from the idea that the paper is the real singular valuable entity that comes out of what we fund, to really the software algorithms and the data, when well formed and so forth and reusable, it becomes equally, if in some cases you could argue, more valuable. And we're working on what we call the FAIR principles, which is to make such data and analytics findable, accessible, interoperable, and retrievable. And we're funding a whole series of initiatives to push that along. We think if that happens, that will improve the efficiency of the research enterprise. And hence that would mean we could fund more research. We just heard that today that the NIH has got a boost in its budget of about $2 billion from the $30 billion, which of course is really good news, but still much more is needed. And the idea of improving efficiency is part of how we think about dealing with big data. And I could say a lot more about that. We're implementing a notion of what we call the commons, which is a shared virtual space for sharing research output. I could talk more about that if there's interest. I talked a little about global cooperation already, and I won't say any more about that. We're spending about 20% of our budget, and I'll detail what that is in a second, on training, because it's clear that supply does not match the demand currently. We have undergraduate, graduate, and also various type of program developments and virtual online, virtual and physical course development activities going on to try and begin to address that. And then, of course, because we deal so much with human subjects data, the issues of security, balancing security versus accessibility are all part of what we're currently looking at in terms of what we fund. So how are we dealing with these sort of opportunities and challenges? We have a program that's ramped up now to about $110 million a year. We fund a series of centers that have a number of nodes, and that's a fraction of our budget, about $35 million. We fund a whole series of software initiatives. Last year, for example, those were initiatives around the idea of supporting software development for visualization, compression, what we call data wrangling, and also provenance. This year, it's more focused around security, as an example. So it changed, those foci change. And as I said, about close to getting on for $20 million a year goes into training. So that's where the money goes. We've been doing this for about a year now in terms of the funding that's actually been out there. And we just had what was our second all-hands meeting around this. DJ Patel, who's the chief data officer for the US government, came and gave a keynote, and that's at the bottom there. We had quite a lot of activity and a large number of people. But I think what's important, and I won't go through all of this, but is we really, and this is kind of the message I want to get across, is there was a real sense at this meeting that something fundamentally different was happening. Janet Thornton, who is not in any way funded by this program, we came to attend the meeting because she actually thought she was just interested in what was going on. She's the former head of the European Biotechnology Institute, which has its equivalent over here in the NCBI, which is part of the National Library of Medicine. And she basically, without prompting, said BD2K, which is this main program for data science at NIH, has already changed the landscape of biomedical research in the USA. The all-hands meeting captured the excitement and challenge and culture and change in culture, that is happening across the biomedical sciences. and realizing that data sharing is central to all of this. She also said there was some really, and I think this is in essence what's going on, some really new and exciting science that really starts to integrate and bring together disparate types of data that we haven't seen before. And we across the enterprise, across everything we're funding, there's a lot of different data types ranging from basic genomics information, proteomics, metabolomics, imaging data, mobile health data coming from Fitbits and a whole series of other devices, electronic health records, and population data. So it's the full spectrum of data types. And we saw some really, I think what are going to be some really exciting outcomes from this first year of research that I'd be happy to bore you with if you're interested. But I won't go into it. But I think it's the essence that of the integration of different data types to get unexpected outcomes. It's also the sharing and collaboration that's going across is happening across the enterprise. So, for example, there are working groups that have spontaneously sprung up around APIs, around working in the commons, putting reference data sets in the commons, building apps on top of these APIs that are then themselves shared in this commons environment, and really starting to build something that's quite open and accessible in ways that we've not really seen before. So I think it'll be interesting to see how it pans out in the next couple of years. But that's pretty much what's happening. And I didn't get into the specifics of particular funding programs, but I'm happy to answer that if you have questions. So let me just stop there and say, if there's anyone still there, thanks very much.
So we have time for a couple of questions, if you're from the audience.
Hold on one second.
Hi. Look, I'm a strong supporter of data and electronic health records in particular, but I don't know how to answer the question that Denmark has had fully electronic health records for its population for 15 years, and people in Denmark still die, and at about the same rate they die in all other countries.
Well, yeah, maybe that's true. But I'd also say that maybe it has nothing to do with big data, but if I'd been giving this lecture in 1900, I'd have been dead 20 years already. We've seen a dramatic increase in life expectancy, and of course it's not all to do with the work of the NIH, but I don't think there's any doubt there are contributions that have happened. Yeah, and I think it is good to be, I wouldn't say you're being cynical, but I think it is good to be cynical about what's going on here, because I think I'm excited about it, but I worry about us, and I'm doing it myself, essentially overselling it. But just to give you an example from what you just quoted, and it might be just too early in the cycle, but I think I've seen some really interesting network graphs of comorbidity studies, which is based on the whole Danish population, where all it is scanning through that and looking, each node on that network is a condition, this identifiable condition through an ICD-9 code or whatever. And then the thickness of the edge between two nodes is the likelihood of moving from one condition to another. So in other words, if you have one condition, you'll get another condition. That's purely based on data that's in the health records. That becomes a really useful diagnostic and predictive tool to take actions against that kind of thing happening. And what becomes more interesting, and in line with what I was describing before, as they can do pretty readily, you overlay socioeconomic data on top of that, you start seeing trends that relate to socioeconomic factors that, clearly, some of this, of course, is intuitive and things we've known for some time, but some of it is, unexpected. And I think that's the hope. And it may be that, okay, they might be dying at the same rate now, but I think as this starts to be used more as a diagnostic tool, maybe that won't be the case. Maybe it will. We'll have to wait and see.
Okay.
Any other questions?
All right. Yes. There are no other questions. Let's thank Phil.
Thank you.